All right, let's get to this big story. So this is a funny story because the Intercept, and who's this guy's name? Nathan Bernard, young guy learning how to do a bullshit story from the Intercept's best.
Learning the ropes.
Learning the ropes. This is how you concoct a story. And he's learning from the best over at the Intercept because they certainly know how to concoct a story. And the headline is, Bates College Administration censors student reporters covering staff unionization. A college administrator pressured the campus paper to take down a pro-union article and revise it to feature management-friendly talking points. So Michael Tracy actually looked into this because he was asked to by the author of that article, and he looked into it, and he found out that the people who they say were censored say they weren't censored. Well, there it is. To suit its ideological agenda, the Intercept fabricated a censorship story that even the censorship victims denounce as false. I guess the Intercept doesn't have enough resources to, check with the people they're writing about. Isn't that wild? So here's what this week, this is from your Substack, Michael Tracy's Substack. This week, the Intercept published an article alleging the administration at Bates College, a small liberal arts school in Maine, had aggressively and shockingly censored the campus's student newspaper. In one of the more bizarre examples of journalistic ineptitude and or intentional malfeasance in recent memory, Intercept writer Nathan Bernard never even tried speaking to his article's two central subjects, the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper and a student reporter whom he proclaims to have been egregiously censored. If you think checking with sources firsthand isn't important, anyway, let's just keep moving. Both expressly deny that they were censored. The two people deny that they were censored. The people they're writing the article about say they weren't censored. But the Intercept says they were without even talking to them. The editor-in-chief of the Bates College student newspaper, Jackson Elkins, explained to me, "We were never censored or coerced." The student reporter referenced by that headline, Elizabeth LaCroix, who told me in plain English, "I do not believe I was censored. I was surprised that I was not interviewed by the Intercept, mostly because their article was centered around an article that I wrote." But, as Elkins told me, I was never reached for comment, he added. "We're student journalists. I would be the first one to complain if I felt we were censored in any way, shape, or form." And here it is. So he tweets this out. Bates College administration censored the campus newspaper. This guy retweets it, says, "Can't wait for Greenwald, Tracy, Barry Weiss, Rumor Report to spend the next week weeping endlessly about this real example of cancel culture on..." And then here he is. "Hopefully they'll cover this." And you go, "Happy to look into it. Sorry, I don't have an opinion immediately ready about everything that goes." And then you did look into it. And of course, when this story was first brought to my attention by Nathan Bernard, I was perfectly willing to believe that administrators at a liberal arts school could have censored an article on campus unionization efforts. It seemed entirely within the realm of possibility, but that just didn't happen. And now misinformation has been spread far and wide across the internet thanks to a bizarre journalistic shoddiness of Bernard and the Intercept. I repeatedly asked Bernard to comment for this Substack article, but curiously, he's much less vocal in recent days and has ignored my requests. I also sent queries to the Intercept editor, Ryan Grimm, friend of the show, who eventually claimed that it was unnecessary for the Intercept to contact a main subject of their article. If you think checking with sources firsthand isn't important, I say your future in journalism is looking pretty grim. Come on, you guys. Okay. Sadly, Ryan Grimm, the D.C. bureau chief of the Intercept, never gave an explanation for why the Intercept didn't bother to contact Elkins, even though he's the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper the Intercept claims was censored. Ryan Grimm did cover the story on the Rising YouTube show, though, again repeating information flatly rejected as false by the two main subjects of the Intercept's article. And I'm going to go, so let me bring in Michael. Bregel, you go ahead and comment whatever you want on this. And while you're talking, I'm going to load that video of Ryan Grimm misstating the facts on Rising. So go ahead, but go full screen on Michael.
Well, I mean, the irony of this story is that it probably never would have gotten on my radar if I hadn't been actively pestered. And it wasn't just that one tweet you showed, it was more. Actively pestered by the writer of the article, Nathan Bernard, and the editor on the article, Ryan Grimm, to comment on it lest I somehow expose my hypocrisy. Because I've covered at times different controversies related to college campuses, and if I couldn't bring myself to denounce this censorship, this horrible instance of censorship, then I would be exposing myself as a fraud and as a total hypocrite. So guess what? I did look into it at their urging, and it turned out to be complete BS. And it only required very cursory checking to even figure that out. Now, I'm not going to argue that this is the most explosive story that I've ever covered, but it is representative of how media outlets like The Intercept, which get no readers and which need to kind of start up feuds in order to draw at least a modicum of some readership to their BS articles, it shows how they get away with just leaving up false information on the internet, and then they'll turn around and denounce quote-unquote misinformation as being enabled by Facebook or whatever the new kind of trendy panic over misinformation is on a given day, YouTube and Jimmy Dore or what have you. They'll leave up an article whose headline is directly contradicted by the very sources who, if they bothered to contact, would have undermined the entire thrust of the article. I mean, all I had to do was contact the reporter whose article they say was, quote, censored, and the editor of the student newspaper who they say had been censored, and they both are adamant that they were not censored. What happened was they had published this article on unionization efforts at Bates College, right, which is, again, this liberal arts college in Maine that few people have heard of. But the Intercept thought they got this really impressive scoop by reporting fake information on. The student reporter had done this story on campus unionization efforts. It was later, according to her, it didn't go through the correct editorial process, and they got a complaint from this PR official who works for Bates College asking them if they could take it down temporarily and do some revisions. And they conferred amongst themselves, meaning the student reporters used their own agency and discretion, conferred amongst themselves, and they decided, they would temporarily take the article down and add some revisions that they would, check and go through an ordinary journalistic process in order to come up with. And, you can question whether it was defensible or whether it was a good idea or whether it was even, worthy of condemnation for this PR official at the college to send an email requesting, not demanding, not coercing, but requesting that an article be taken down. I don't know if I would have done that. Probably not, because it's a pretty dramatic step to take down an article, even if temporarily, and even if you think there were some inaccuracies that had been correctly pointed out that their article contains. But nonetheless, the students are vehement when they say they did it on their own accord. When the Intercept first rushed out its BS article, the student reporter and the editor-in-chief had to release a statement rebutting the Intercept because they had never even been contacted. They had never even been asked if they were censored. I mean, Jimmy, if there was a big story about how you had been censored, right, or I heard a rumor about it, what would be the first thing I'd do in order to ascertain if you've been censored so I could write an article about that?
You would call me probably and ask me.
But they didn't do it. And why didn't they do it? Well, that's an interesting question. What they did do was they went off exclusively this activist press release that had been put up by student organizers who were pro-unionization. And by the way, the student journalist says that she was pro-unionization. The one that they say was censored or capitulated to censorship, she's pro-union, right? So they slimed her without even bothering to ask her for a comment. And yet this defamatory information essentially is still up, because if you're a student journalist and you've never been in the limelight before, and all of a sudden this national media outlet is swooping in to say that you either were censored or you capitulate to censorship, then that's pretty harmful to your reputation, right? And to not even ask them for comment, not even to go to them ahead of time and ask them if they have been censored, it breaks one of the most basic rules, not just of journalism. Of course, if you're a journalist, you ought to talk to the subject that you're purporting to report on. I mean, that's just like journalism. It's not even journalism 101. It's like remedial journalism instruction for middle schoolers or something. But even if you're just like a sane human and you want to comment on somebody and you claim that you have some new information that reflects on them, you go to them and ask them about it, right? Especially if they're available. I mean, these weren't like CIA operatives. They had their information out in the public domain because they wanted people to contact them and ask them about what had happened. But what the Intercept did was, Nathan Bernard got this hot scoop, which was essentially an activist press release that made the allegation that there was censorship of this newspaper and put the contact information of this reporter on the press release, which gave the impression that the reporter was endorsing the claim that she had been censored when she wasn't. This was an activist tactic, which worked on dupes and gullible kind of quasi-journalists like Nathan Bernard, who just repackaged the press release. Now, I don't care if it's an activist press release or a corporate press release or a government press release. Journalism is never just taking a press release at its word and maybe, fiddling with it around the margins and then republishing that under your own byline. Otherwise, why bother? Why not just use the press release? That's what they did, though. And they didn't even, in the article, say whether they had contacted the two main characters of their own article. They just kind of alluded to them and gestured at them, which is bizarre. Because this student journalist, her phone number and email address were on this document that Nathan Bernard so, exclusively obtained. But they didn't call her. Now, why didn't they call her? Well, I mean, you could speculate that if they had called them, it would have negated their entire article and Nathan Bernard wouldn't have got his flashy Intercept byline. But you think that Ryan Grimm, who's a very experienced editor and journalist, who's worked for the Intercept now for, I think, 4 years, had been the top editor at the Washington Bureau of the Huffington Post for a long time, is fairly well regarded, has even done some good stuff at times. You think he would maybe have double-checked to see if the journalist whose imprimatur he's giving to as editor of the Intercept had contacted the main two subjects of their article? But he didn't do it, and then they have the audacity to do this complete botch job and then go around and start challenging media personalities they don't like to comment on it and condemn it without even independently looking into it. I guess they didn't assume that I actually would take them up on their challenge. Not that it was that much effort. It just required like 2 phone calls. They didn't assume that I actually would look into it, verify it for myself without just kind of casually commenting on something that I haven't independently corroborated. And it turns out the entire thing fell apart. And so Nathan Bernard, once I was putting together this Substack article, he went radio silent. Ryan Grimm initially claimed that it was fine that they didn't contact the reporter because they had gotten this statement from her, which was the activist press release, which if they had bothered to look into it, they would have known was not her statement. But they didn't do it. They didn't do the number one thing that like an elementary school journalist would be taught to do, which is you contact the people you're purporting to report on. And so, now this article is just out there, not corrected, floating around. You have people sharing it on social media with extra false information. I mean, Nathan Bernard had a viral tweet saying that the editors literally or that the college administration literally took down the article and then republished it themselves with edits, just flatly, factually false. If they had bothered to talk to the editor of the newspaper, they would have known that he did it himself. And he literally pushed the button on the website's on the website to take it down. But I didn't get that because they had a narrative. They had to make this meta point about the hypocrisy of media personalities. They named me, Barry Weiss, Glenn Greenwald, others, who they wanted to catch in this little, trap. Because if they didn't comment on this unionization censorship, then they must not honestly be opposed to censorship as they claim to be. Well, I mean, this might come as a shock to them, but some of us actually are on principle opposed to censorship, and I would have gladly condemned this if it wasn't BS. Right,
but it was BS. And here's Ryan Grimm on Rising, misframing it and continuing the lie. By the way, you Yes, he is for some reason by people in the industry, people who I have disdain for, the fucking journalism industry, which sucks. Which is why I have which is why this video is going to get 10 more times more views than any fucking thing he ever writes. It's because they suck. And
Don't rub it in, Jimmy.
I in my fucking garage as a comedian with no journalism training can outdo those motherfuckers whenever I try. I do it with Russiagate. I did it with Syria. I did it with Forced to Vote. I exposed how Ryan Grimm, the DC bureau chief, was lying and running interference for politicians, Democratic politicians, performing access journalism. I was able to do that, so much so that he started blocking me and started tweeting about me after he blocked me. That's the DC bureau chief blocked a guy in his garage and then continued to fucking smear him on Twitter. That shows you he's a coward, a liar, a propagandist, and a guy who deals from the bottom of the deck. That's who he is. He's just as slimy as the people he covers. And, well, let's watch this. I haven't seen this yet. Let's see this.
Ryan, what's on your radar?
So we talk a lot on this show about cancel culture, wokeness, and speech debates on campus, and it always seems to involve the same few colleges. And the notion of the existence of a working person never seems to enter into the equation. The only exception seems to be when a hapless janitor gets fired for offending students by enforcing campus rules. Then, for a few days, the janitor is denounced as racist, and then the anti-woke crowd comes in and condemns the oversensitive students and the weak, groveling administration, and we wait until the next student gets triggered, and we do the whole thing all over again. So yesterday, The Intercept reported on a new, or maybe not so new, version of the genre, but this one involved actual, indisputable political censorship by a college administration, and it also involved, and this is probably why you won't hear much about it from our elite media, it involved campus workers.
I like how he likes to call someone else elite media. Isn't that hilarious? He's sitting there doing a show funded by a billionaire, talking about an article that he edited in another publication funded by another billionaire. And somehow he's not elite media? You're fucking crazy. Of course you're elite media. Anyway.
Jimmy, I mean, it's so hilarious. Notice he said that this story he's about to break on The Rising constitutes indisputable proof of political censorship. Meanwhile, the two main characters of the article he's about to recite, who they never bothered to contact, vehemently dispute it. So it's not only disputed, it's, as I said, BS. But I mean, it's hilarious that he would even do that introduction, knowing how shoddy the quote journalism was to produce this supposed blockbuster story.
I got a hot scoop about a college newspaper. It's not a sentence you hear very often. Hey, that hot scoop about the college newspaper wasn't really a thing. Not a sentence you're supposed to hear ever. But there it is. So there's Ryan Grimm again. It's so easy. Every time I look at his work or what he's doing on Twitter, it's just bullshit. Every time I take a look at it. So here he is again. And complete full of shit. He lied about this show, said we didn't drop a video that we interviewed him on when we fucking dropped it. And it's available like all our other videos. And so he lied about that because that's all he's got, right? When I catch them lying around Forced to Vote. I call him lying around Forced to Vote and running interference for politicians. And everyone saw it. And it was easy. It wasn't hard. I'm not good at this. I'm just a fucking comedian. But they suck at this. They're horrible. And why? Because they're all trying to get another job with a billionaire. And Ryan Grimm gets a check from not one billionaire, not two billionaires. Ryan Grimm gets a check from 3 billionaires. He gets a check from the billionaire who owns The Hill, the billionaire who owns The Intercept, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, the billionaire who owns the Young Turks. That's his 3 billionaire paychecks. And this guy's talking about someone else being elite media. He's the biggest shit lib you're going to fucking find. He lies about progressives. He lies about activists. And now we're catching him completely lying about this story and never retracting it. That story's still up, right, Michael? It's up, yeah. They haven't amended it at all, except for a phony correction that they put at the end. That, you know, it's like if I were to report that it was raining today, but I hadn't looked out the window, and then I look out the window and it's not raining, and then I correct and say, oh,
I previously reported that it was raining. It turns out it's not raining, but I stand by my reporting.
I stand by my report. That's like saying, hey, you're being censored. No, we're not being censored. Okay, I'm going to print the story, and at the bottom, I'll say you weren't being censored. That's what they did. And by the way, other people picked this up, which was hilarious. So Emma Vigeland, who's making a professional career out of being ridiculous on the internet, it's such a gift. She says, where are the college campus free speech anti-cancel culture warriors on this one? I'd imagine there has to be a Rumble video or a Substack post on this any minute now, which is hilarious because she works for Comcast. She gets a check from the fucking pro-war, pro-censorship Comcast, anti-worker Comcast, which is always considered the worst company in the world to work for when they do the surveys. This is who she gets her check from, but she's superior to people who have a Substack or are on Rumble. Okay, squiggly line. And I followed through on her challenge to do a Substack post, and she's not addressed it yet. Yeah, so she challenges you to do the Substack because she's 100% wrong. She's again repeating misinformation, which is what they do when you have a show on a Comcast network. That's hilarious. Well, the entire story was fake for one, so that's why they didn't see any. What we should see them. Well, Jay Jelani said, "Well, the entire story was fake." For one, Matt Taibbi responded to her saying, where we are is glad we didn't comment since the story turned out to be full of holes. Also, Glenn Greenwald responded saying, I spend more time and energy reporting on free speech attacks on leftists, pro-Palestinian activists, and Israel critics than all of those trite couch-bound DNC YouTubers combined. And I can actually speak about it to an ideologically mixed audience, which they cannot do. Their audience is just shit libs 100%, but it's a very small section of the shit lib audience. No one watches their show. Not to mention her entire story is fucking made up. Glenn Greenwald, LOL. Exactly. Of all the stories to pick to make this hypocrisy point, how humiliating that she chose one of this of complete fabrication and journalistic fraud. And this is what Emma Vigeland did to herself. There it comes. Ready? Oh, boom. There you go. Okay. So that was kind of funny. They just can't help themselves. Well, Michael, great job on the story. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. Can you go back to the Emma Vigeland tweet for a second? There's something else that I want to point out. You notice that she's sharing the initial sort of promotional tweet from this dope Nathan Bernard, where he makes two factual assertions in that tweet that then Ryan Grimm repeats on the Hill, right? Or he puts his own spin on the Hill. He says, in that tweet, it says Bates College administration censored the campus newspaper. Okay. Deleting an article on staff unionizing, then republishing with over 10,000 new words. Okay, so that would mean that the Bates College administration themselves kind of intervened in the newspaper's mechanics and took it over and deleted an article and published a new article themselves, which, if true, would be pretty egregious and would be worth calling censorship. But it's just false. And he doesn't know it's false, apparently, or he doesn't care because he didn't contact the guy who could have told him that he was full of it and that he actually personally took down the article. And then Ryan Grimm, also in that Hill segment, he says that he repeats this phony claim that the administration edited the article themselves when the student journalists did it. So you're actually depriving them of agency. You're depriving them of autonomy and just kind of opining there at your Intercept perch that somehow they didn't act on their own volition. You could agree or disagree with what they did or question it or challenge it, but to just deny it what they did, deny it, and then not give them an opportunity to correct the record? I mean, it makes no sense. So Ryan Grimm has now put out fake information, not just on the Intercept, not just on social media. I mean, this bogus stories went rocketed across Twitter because somehow it proved that there was this whole clique of cancel culture warriors who weren't going to comment on this new blockbuster story because it contradicted their narrative or something. And it's also he also repeated false information on the Hill, and there's no correction. And so, what they want is for this to just fade away because it's not that significant in the story. Who cares about Bates College? It's not like they, malign the president or something falsely or whoever else, where it would actually steamroll into something that they had to address. No, it was just a minor college campus controversy. And so they're just going to wait it out and hope that people forget. Which, it's probably going to work because, within these media worlds, there's a lot of interdependence. Like if you go after somebody like Ryan Grimm, that could come back to bite you, and it could create drama that you don't want to have to deal with because you don't want to rock the boat, which I get. I don't have anything personally against the guy. But, if you're going to challenge me publicly to take a look at your dumbass story and it turns out to fall apart at a moment's glance, then I'm probably going to follow up on that and ask what it says about your journalistic integrity that you don't bother to correct anything. Almost a year ago now, the Federalist, which is right-wing pro-Trump website, which I've actually written for a couple of times, as I have the Intercept, by the way, years ago when doing so was still considered like a somewhat desirable thing. The Federalist put out an article that was false. I mean, they published false claims about the 2020 election, having to do with election fraud or whatever. I easily disprovable. I informed them about it, and then even though Donald Trump himself had tweeted that article, they ended up effectively retracting the article because they recognized that it was false. The Intercept has lower editorial standards than the Federalist, which is one of these outlets which they would otherwise run around screaming is this propagator of misinformation because it's editorially right wing. It's just ludicrous that they don't bother correcting any of this because it's just me on lowly Substack who figured this out, over the course of an afternoon. And so therefore it doesn't require their response because it's just, Michael Tracy's at Substack. We don't like Michael Tracy, whatever. But I guarantee you, and actually Aaron Mate pointed this out, and he was totally right. If Eric Wemple at the Washington Post or Ben Smith at the New York Times, if they had come up with the exact same story, it would have been a PR crisis for the Intercept, and they would have all scrambled to, put out an apology and say how terribly they feel about it for impugning these student journalists without giving them a chance to respond. They would have disavowed this Nathan Bernard character who, I actually previously thought was just some kind of internet troll, but now the Intercept will take anybody because they're so flailing and they have no readership. It's aside from the specifics of the story, which are not worth really even litigating that much. Although I will say that Ryan Grimm says that he's standing up to the fallacious cancel culture critics by saying that the workers were really censored at Bates College, and we don't care about that because it wasn't some prestigious media personality being censored. Well, he actually misrepresented a worker. Yes, he said that a worker had been censored because the student journalist revised or excised one of the quotes that wasn't clear and had a parenthetical in it, meaning she got rid of this quote for banal reasons, just for the purpose of clarity. But if you actually read the article, which I don't think they even did, like this article in the student newspaper on unionization, you'll find that the same worker who was supposedly censored and had this nefarious violation imposed upon him, there are actually other quotes that make the same point that was supposedly censored, but more clearly and more factually. So the student journalist I talked to was actually saying that her whole point in revising the article and making some additions or whatever, it was because she's pro-union. She wanted to amplify the workers and make it more clear what they were saying and arguing. But, of course, the Intercept had no idea that was the case because they didn't bother contacting her, whether through active malfeasance, which is possible, maybe probable, or ineptitude, which is certainty.
Well,
probably some combination.
They definitely know. Well, I would say malfeasance because they know the story is false right now, and they're still. Didn't somehow Ryan Grimm accuse you of being doing bad journalism? Didn't he say, "Here's my question again that you won't answer" or something?
Oh, I mean, it's been so circuitous when I've tried to address this with him. It goes around in circles. Like he'll say that I'm actually the bad one because
yes, I saw that.
I'm defending the college administrators.
Yes, I saw that.
I'm defending, the additions that were made.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, what I'm defending is a basic standard of factual accuracy in the context of a story that you were personally badgering for me to comment on, lest I be exposed for my hypocrisy. And you were like lording this over everyone, and you're going on your YouTube show and on Twitter and everywhere else, putting out fake information. It's just not true. Or it's so egregiously false and mischaracterized that I would say you could fairly conclude that it amounts to just an outright fabrication, or as Greenwald said, a fraud. It is a fraud. It's a fraud to put out this blaring all-caps headline about how 2 student journalists were censored and then just gloss over the fact that you never bothered to contact the censorship victims. I mean, that's absurd. I know. That's absurd even if you're not a journalist. I mean, if you're just like a decent person, you wouldn't do that. And yet, Ryan Grimm, I mean, I've heard through the grapevine that Ryan Grimm, maybe was caught off guard by the shoddiness of this article and now has gone, is doing all these mental gymnastics to justify why it doesn't need to be retracted or corrected and to defend it and, flip it around on me and deflect and say I'm somehow bad for some reason, even though they don't dispute what I've reported in the article, in the Substack. I mean, it's not like it's the most intrepid investigative journalism of all time. I just called up the 2 main characters of their own article who they forgot to get in touch with, or more likely intentionally omitted so they could further this dumb narrative about the media and score a few cancel culture points for their rising monologue and on today's Twitter.
And when you're an establishment guy getting checks from 3 billionaires. There's no price to pay for Ryan Grimm doing egregiously false, fraudulent journalism. If I did that, they'd fucking call Neera Tanden, she'd call the head of Google, they'd call YouTube, and they'd get my fucking channel taken down. If I did reporting as shitty as he just did, Ryan Grimm and the Intercept, I would get my fucking channel taken down. But nothing's going to happen to him. Just like when he lied about forced to vote, just like when he lied about this, there's never going to be a price for him to pay. Just like when he prints press releases from fucking Democratic politicians, pretends he's looking out for the little guy as he's being paid by 3 different billionaires. All right, I got to move on. But Michael, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for exposing the fraud that the Intercept and Ryan Grimm are.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy. Whenever we talk, I feel like I've gotten a lot off my chest. I owe you some money for my
therapy. No problem. I want to let you know, on November 6th, we're going to be in Baltimore. November 11th, we're in Tempe, Arizona. November 12th, we're doing Los Angeles and Studio City. November 19th, Los Angeles and Studio City. And then Thanksgiving weekend in Portland, Oregon. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.